and protecting property from theft or fraud. In an ideal world, transactions would occur instantaneously and without friction. In reality, every transaction involves some level of uncertainty and risk. Institutions help reduce these transition costs. Legal systems clarify property ownership. Courts enforce contracts. Regulations establish standards that reduce disputes about quality. Financial systems facilitate secure payment. By lowering the cost of transactions, institutions allow markets to operate more efficiently at a larger scale. Institutions and long term growth. North's research heavily focused on economic history, examining how institutional systems evolve over centuries and how those changes affected economic development. One of his most influential studies examined the transformation of politics and economic institutions in England during the 17th century. Political conflicts between the monarchy and parliament accumulated in the Glorious Revolution of 1688. The outcome altered the balance of power within the English political system. Parliamentary Parliament gained greater authority over taxation and government finance. Legal protection for property became more secure. Financial institutions, such as the Bank of England, emerged to support government borrowing and commercial activity. These institutional changes reduced uncertainty for investors. Government commitments to repay debt became more credible. Property rights became more sustainable. Financial markets expanded. According to North, these developments helped create the institutional environment that supported Britain's rapid economic growth during the 19th and 18th century. Path dependency. Another concept emphasized by North is path dependency. Institutions tend to evolve gradually over time rather than appearing suddenly. Historical events, cultural norms, and political decisions shape institutional structures in ways that persist for generations. Once a particular institutional framework becomes established, it can influence future choices and limit alternative paths. A country that develops a strong legal tradition protecting property and enforcing contracts may attract investment and build complex financial markets. A country where institutions historically allow arbitrary confiscation or corruption may struggle to build similar systems of trust and investment. These patterns can persist even after political conditions change. Institutional history shapes economic trajectories, and because institutions are human creations, not natural laws, they can also be reformed. But such changes often occur slowly because institutional systems involve complex interactions between law, politics, and economic incentives. Darren epistemology, inclusive versus extractive institutions. If institutions shape incentives, the next question becomes obvious. What kind of institutions encourage growth? Douglas North showed that stable rules matter. Daron, together with political science James Robson, pushed the argument further by asking what kind of institutional systems, s- sorry, pushed the argument further by asking what makes institutional systems stable in the first place, and why some institutional frameworks generate broad perspectives while others produce stagnation. Their central idea is that the institutions tend to fall into two broad categories: inclusive institutions and extractive institutions. Let's look at inclusive institutions. Inclusive institutions are systems designed to allow broad participation in economic activity. They protect property rights. They enforce contracts. They provide relatively predictable rules governing economic interactions. Most importantly, that they allow a large number of people, not just a small elite, to participate in markets, entrepreneurship, and innovation. In inclusive systems, individuals can start businesses without requiring permission from powerful political actors. Investors can commit capital knowing their property will not be arbitrarily seized. Entrepreneurs can introduce new technologies that challenge existing industries. These conditions create incentives for productivity and innovation. People invest in education and skills because they expect to benefit from their efforts. Business develops new products and technology because the institutional environment rewards innovation. Over time, these incentives can generate sustained economic growth. Now, let's look at extractive institutions. Extractive institutions operate differently. Instead of encouraging broad participation, they concentrate economic and political power in the hands of narrow groups. Property rights may exist, but apply primarily to the elite. Political leaders may control access to economic opportunities. Corruption may distort economic decisions, making laws. Corruption may distort economic decision making. Laws may be primarily selected selectively depending on economic connections. Under these conditions, economic activities often become focused on extracting wealth rather than creating it. Elite may use political power to capture valuable resources, land, natural resources, or government privilege, without improving productivity. Entrepreneurs who threaten establishing interests may face legal obstacles or confrontation. Investment declines because the reward for innovations are uncertain. Economic systems organized around extraction often struggle to generate sustained growth. Insti- Institutional persistence. One of the striking features of institutional systems is how long they can persist. Once a particular institutional structure becomes established, the groups benefiting from it often have strong incentives to maintain it. Elites benefit from extractive systems, may resist reform that would distribute economic opportunities more widely. Conversely, societies with inclusive institutions may develop political systems that reinforce those inclusive structures. This persistence can help explain why institutional differences between countries can last for decades or even centuries. Institutional change is possible, but it often involves major political or social transformations. The institutional foundation of the clock. Seen through the metaphor of the economic clock, inclusive institutions create a stable case that support the entire mechanism. The gears of production turn smoothly because property rights are protected. Markets transmit information through prices. Financial systems allocate capital. Entrepreneurs innovate. Workers move between opportunities. In extractive systems, the case of the clock becomes unstable. Rules change unpredictably. Owners become uncertain. Economic actors hesitate to invest. The gears grind against one another rather than turning smoothly. The machine still operates, but far less effectively. These differences become most vivid when we examine real societies where institutional choices produce dramatically different economic outcomes. Historical case study. Abstract arguments about institutions become much clearer when we examine real world examples. Sometimes the most convincing evidence appears when two societies with similar starting conditions follow dramatically different economic paths. History provides several striking cases where institutional differences, not geography, culture, or natural resources, produce very different outcomes. Let's look at North Korea and South Korea. Few comparisons are as stark as the Korean Peninsula. Before the middle of the 20th century, Korea was a single country with a shared culture, language, and history. After the Second World War, however, the peninsula was divided into two separate states. North Korea developed a central authorized system in which the states controlled most economic activity. Private property rights were limited, markets were heavily restricted, and economic decisions were directed by governments' planning authorities. South Korea followed a different path. Although the country initially experienced periods of authoritarian rule, it gradually developed institutions supporting private enterprise, international trade, and technological development. The results over several decades were dramatic. South Korea transformed into the world's most advanced industrial economies. Companies such as Samsung, Hyundai, and LG became global technological and manufacturing leaders. North Korea remained largely isolated from global markets, with economic activity tightly controlled by the state. Today, the contrast between the two countries is visible even from space. Satellite images at night show South Korea illuminated by dense networks of electric light, while North Korea appears mostly dark. The difference is not geography, it is institutional structures. East Germany and West Germany. A similar comparison emerged in Europe during the Cold War. After the Second World War, Germany was divided into two states. East Germany adopted a market based economic system supported by strong legal institutions, property rights, and integration into global trade networks. East Germany, under Soviet influence, adopted a central planning economic system in which major industries were controlled by the states. Both societies began with a shared cultural heritage, similar levels of education, and access to comparable technologies. Yet over time, their economy performance diverged. West Germany experienced rapid economic growth during the post war period, often referred to as Wirtschaftswunder or economic miracle. Industrial production expanded, living standards improved, and the country became one of the largest economies in Europe. East Germany achieved certain industrial success, but struggled to match the productivity and living standards of its Western counterpart. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989 and the two German states reunified, the economic gap between them was unmistakable. Institutional structures, not cultures or starting resources, had shaped the divergence. Another example, Hong Kong and Venezuela. Institutional contrasts can also appear between societies that began with very different historical circumstances. Hong Kong is a small territory with limited natural resources. During the 20th century, it developed into one of the world's most dynamic financial and commercial centers, driven by strong legal protections for property rights, efficient courts enforcing contracts, low barriers to starting businesses, and open trade policy. Venezuela presented a different case. The country possessed some of the largest oil reserves in the world and once ranked amongst the wealthiest nations in Latin America. Yet political instability, weak property protection, and economic policies that undermine markets' incentives contribute to declining investment and severe economic disruption. In recent years, Venezuela has experienced dramatic inflation, declining production, and widespread economic hardship. Natural resources alone did not determine these outcomes. Institutional structures played a critical role. Clock mechanism, the case. To understand why institutions matter so much, it helps to return briefly to the mechanism of a physical clock. When people imagine a clock, they usually picture the dial, the numbers, and the hands that move across its face. But inside the clock lies a far more intricate system. A mainspring stores energy. A gear train transmits motion. The escapement regulates the release of that energy. A balance wheel keeps the motion steady. Each component performs a distinct function, yet none of these parts could operate properly if it were simply laid out on a table. They require something else, a case. Holding the mechanism together. The case